They say the worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from the person who holds your heart, the one you would willingly take a bullet for. That summer afternoon, I stood frozen behind my car. I looked at my wife kissing that man, Sarah, the woman I had loved unconditionally for 12 beautiful years. The woman with whom I built a life. That man who stood on the threshold, smiling warmly before wrapping Sarah into a tight, familiar embrace, was the last person on earth I ever expected to see. In that single fleeting fraction of a second, 12 years of absolute trust shattered into a million jagged pieces. Every memory, every shared laugh, every late-night promise we made to each other instantly turned to ash. To understand the sheer weight of that moment, you have to understand who we were. Sarah and I met in our late 20s. I was an ambitious, hard-working structural engineer, a man who viewed the world through the lens of logic, stability, and blueprints. If you build a foundation correctly, the structure will stand against any storm. That was my philosophy. Sarah was a landscape architect, a beautiful, vibrant soul who brought color into my rigid, monochrome world. She could look at a barren, muddy patch of earth and see a thriving garden. When we married, I promised myself I would spend the rest of my days ensuring she never had to worry about a single thing. I worked long, grueling 60-hour weeks, climbing the corporate ladder, earning a comfortable life for us in our quiet town just outside Chicago. We had a beautiful brick home, a dog that slept at the foot of our bed, and a marriage that our friends openly envied. We never had screaming matches. We didn't keep secrets, or so I thought. Every single year, during the second week of June, our routine would change. Sarah's phone would ring, and her face would cloud over with a familiar, deep-seated anxiety. It was always the same call. Her mother calling to give an update on Great Aunt Martha. Martha was supposedly her late father's oldest living relative. A frail, fiercely independent woman struggling with advanced dementia and failing health in a small town 3 hours north. Sarah's family was small, and according to her, Martha had no one else left in the world to look after her. She doesn't remember much anymore, David Sarah would tell me, her eyes filling with tears as she packed her bags. But when I sit by her bed and hold her hand, she calms down. I owe it to my dad's memory to be there for her. It's just 4 days. I need to do this alone. It breaks my heart to see her like that, and I don't want to drag you into that sadness. I loved her even more for it. I saw her annual solo trip as a testament to her profound capacity for empathy and kindness. While I stayed behind, working, managing the house, and missing her terribly, I would picture my sweet wife sitting in a sterile, dimly lit room, patiently comforting a dying old woman. I would send her supportive text messages, telling her how proud I was to be her husband. She would reply hours later, saying the reception in the rural area was terrible, thanking me for understanding, and telling me she couldn't wait to come home to my arms. When she returned, she always looked emotionally exhausted, carrying a heavy quietness that took days to dissipate. I would hold her tight, cook her favorite meals, and give her the space she needed to heal from the emotional toll of watching a loved one fade away. This went on for 7 years. 7 years of absolute, unquestioning faith. But looking back, the cracks in the foundation were always there. I was just too blind, too deeply in love to see them. It started with small things that my logical mind easily dismissed as trivial oddities. 3 years ago, I noticed she had turned off the lock screen notifications on her phone, a device she used to leave carelessly on the kitchen counter. Suddenly, it was always face down or tucked safely in her pocket. When I asked her about it casually over breakfast, she laughed it off, saying she was tired of work emails interrupting her peace during her mornings with me. I believed her. Then there were the physical traces. 2 summers ago, when she returned from her trip, I went to help her unload the car. As I lifted her tan duffel bag from the trunk, a small, brightly colored, plastic Toya little blue toy car slid out from the side pocket and clattered onto the driveway. I picked it up, frowning. We didn't have children. Aunt Martha certainly didn't play with toy cars. "What's this, sweetie?" I asked, holding it up. Sarah's face instantly drained of color. She snatched the toy from my hand, her laugh sounding forced, high-pitched and entirely unnatural. "Oh? That. I found it on the floor of a diner on the highway. A little boy at the next table dropped it, and I must have slipped it into my pocket to give back to him, but I forgot. I'm so clumsy. Again, I chose to believe her. Why would I doubt the woman who kissed me every morning before I went to work? Why would I suspect the woman who held my hand when my own father passed away? But suspicion is like a mold. Once a single spore takes root in the dark, it spreads silently, eating away at the structure until the whole thing threatens to collapse. Last summer, the anomaly was a scent. When Sarah came home from her 4-day trip, I wrapped my arms around her neck, burying my face in her hair. Instead of the familiar crisp scent of her lavender shampoo or the sterile, soapy smell of a care home, she smelled of something entirely different. It was an expensive, distinct men's cologne, something woody, spicy, and intimately lingering. New shampoo? I asked softly, trying to keep my voice light, though an icy spike of adrenaline shot straight through my chest. She stiffened slightly in my embrace, just for a fraction of a second, before pulling away with a bright, tight smile. No, silly. Aunt Martha's nurse uses this incredibly strong medicinal ointment on her joints. It gets on everything. It's awful, right? I need to take a shower immediately. I stood alone in the hallway as the sound of running water echoed through the house. For the first time in our 12 years together, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I looked at the closed bathroom door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The logical engineer in me began to review the data, recalculating the stress points of our marriage. The math wasn't adding up anymore. The diner toy, the locked phone, the expensive men's cologne, the sudden tension in her shoulders whenever her sick aunt was mentioned. The tipping point arrived exactly 1 month ago. It was a Tuesday evening, and Sarah was downstairs in the kitchen making dinner. Her phone was sitting on the coffee table in the living room. Suddenly, it buzzed violently. I didn't mean to spy. I truly didn't. But the screen lit up, exposing a text message preview that had slipped through her privacy settings. The contact name was simply saved as an initial M. The message read, "Asterisk countdown is on. Only 3 weeks until June. The house feels empty without you. We miss you so much, asterisk. We miss you. Not asterisk I asterisk miss you. Asterisk we asterisk." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. Sing Martha? No, an elderly woman suffering from advanced, severe dementia does not send text messages talking about how a house feels empty. An elderly woman in a care home doesn't use the plural we to express longing. The pieces of the puzzle, long scattered and ignored, began to violently rush together, forming a picture that horrified me. Sarah wasn't spending her summers comforting a dying relative. She was escaping to a completely different life. A life that included someone else. Someone who missed her. Someone she kept hidden away in the dark. Far away from the husband who worked himself to the bone to provide for her. I managed to sit back down on the couch just as Sarah walked into the room, holding 2 plates of pasta. She smiled at me, her beautiful green eyes warm and inviting. "Everything okay, Davy?" she asked, setting a plate down in front of me. "You look a little pale." "Yeah," I lied, my voice cracking slightly. I forced a smile that felt like cracking concrete. Just a long day at the office. Lots of pressure on the new high-rise project. "You work too hard, honey," she said softly, reaching out to stroke my cheek. Her touch, which used to bring me immense comfort, now made my skin crawl with an unbearable, burning friction. "You need to learn to relax." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt, any trace of malice. There was nothing. She was perfectly composed. She was a master of the narrative. How long had she been living this double life? How many times had she looked into my eyes and lied without blinking? The realization that I didn't truly know the woman sleeping next to me was a terrifying, isolating kind of pain. I didn't confront her that night. I knew that if I confronted her without absolute proof, she would find a way to explain it away. She would weave another beautiful, tragic story, and because I loved her, I would want to believe her. I needed to see it for myself. I needed the undeniable truth, no matter how much it was going to destroy me. The next 3 weeks were a agonizing psychological torture. I carried myself like a ghost through my own life. I smiled at her jokes. I kissed her goodbye before work. and I lay awake in the dark every night, listening to the steady, rhythmic sound of her breathing, wondering who she was dreaming about. I began my preparation. I took a week of accumulated paid time off from my firm, telling my boss it was a family emergency. I didn't tell Sarah as far as she knew. I was still buried under blueprints and deadlines at the office. Then, the second week of June arrived. The weather was bright, beautiful, and sickeningly cheerful. I watched Sarah pack the tan leather duffel bag with a sense of grim, sickening dread. Every article of clothing she folded felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive you this year, Sarah?" I asked, leaning against the bedroom doorframe, keeping my tone perfectly casual. "Work is a bit slow this week. I can finally take the time off and meet Aunt Martha. It's about time I pay my respects." She froze for a split second, her back turned to me. When she turned around, her expression was a flawless mask of gentle, sorrowful rejection. "Oh, David, that's so incredibly sweet of you. But no, Martha's condition has deteriorated so much this year. She has violent outbursts now and she barely recognizes me. It would break my heart for you to see her like this. Let me handle it. I'll be back on Friday and then we can have a nice, quiet weekend together, just the two of us." She walked over, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me deeply. It felt like a betrayal of biblical proportions. "I love you," she whispered against my lips. "I love you too," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. An hour later, her car pulled out of our driveway. I stood at the window watching her taillights disappear down the street. The moment she turned the corner, the love that had sustained me for 12 years hardened into something fierce, cold and calculated. I grabbed my keys, walked out to my own car, and started the engine. I waited a few minutes to give her a head start, and then I began to follow her. I followed her into the bright summer heat, down highways and through tolls, watching her silver sedan stay a steady distance ahead of me. I followed her past the exit for the rural town where Aunt Martha supposedly lived. She didn't turn north. She kept driving east toward an affluent, quiet lakeside suburb 3 hours away. I followed her that summer, and I immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, an endless ribbon of asphalt melting under the intense June sun. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went completely numb. Every few miles, a wave of intense nausea would wash over me, forcing me to take deep, ragged breaths to keep from pulling over and vomiting on the side of the road. I kept my distance, staying 3 or 4 cars behind Sarah's silver sedan, weaving through the midday traffic like a predator tracking its prey. My mind was a chaotic storm of flashing memories and sudden, horrifying realizations. I thought about our wedding day. I thought about the vows we made in front of God and our families. Asterisk, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part. Asterisk, I had meant every single syllable. I had built the entire infrastructure of my existence around those words. Now, watching her car glide effortlessly down a highway she had no logical reason to be on, I realized those vows were nothing more than a script to her. A performance designed to keep the stable, hard-working husband content at home, while she chased whatever secret life she was hiding out here. As the hours ticked by, the landscape changed. The flat, industrial expanses of the highway gave way to rolling green hills, towering oak trees, and glimpses of a sparkling blue lake in the distance. This wasn't a forgotten, depressed town home to a state-funded care facility. This was an affluent, picturesque sanctuary for the wealthy. The houses here didn't look like places where people came to die. They looked like places where people came to live beautiful, undisturbed lives. Sarah turned her car off the main road and entered a quiet, tree-lined residential avenue. The houses here were sprawling, beautiful mid-century modern structures, set back behind manicured lawns and vibrant, blooming gardens. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood Sarah loved. It was the kind of neighborhood she always dreamed we would live in one day. I slowed my car down, letting the distance between us widen so she wouldn't spot me in her rearview mirror. My heart was pounding so violently against my ribs that I could hear the dull, heavy thudding in my ears. Asterisk, this is it. Asterisk, I thought. Asterisk, the moment of impact. Asterisk, there was no turning back now. The illusion was dead. Whatever remained of my marriage was about to be obliterated, and I had to force myself to watch it happen. She pulled her silver sedan into the driveway of a beautiful, two-story house painted a soft, serene shade of blue. The driveway was lined with hydrangea, Sarah's absolute favorite flower. The lawn was pristine, clearly cared for with immense love and precision. I drove past the house, keeping my head down, and parked my car 50 yards down the street under the heavy shade of a massive weeping willow tree. I turned off the ignition. The sudden silence inside the car was deafening. I sat there for a moment, my hand resting on the keys. Part of me, the weak, desperate part of me that still loved her more than life itself, began to beg me to just turn the key, start the engine, and drive away. Asterisk, go home, David. Asterisk, the voice whispered. Asterisk, if you don't see it, it isn't real. You can go back to your quiet life. You can keep pretending. Asterisk, but the engineer in me, the man who demanded truth and structural integrity, silenced the voice. A foundation built on a lie is already collapsed. It's just a matter of time before the debris suffocates you. I opened the car door and stepped out into the thick, humid summer air. The sun beat down on my shoulders, but I felt utterly ice cold. I walked carefully down the sidewalk, using the thick hedges and parked cars of the neighbors as cover. My eyes were locked onto Sarah. She'd stepped out of her car. She stood in the driveway for a moment, stretching her arms above her head, taking a deep, appreciative breath of the lake air. She looked incredibly happy. There was no trace of the heavy, somber expression she always wore when she left our house. She walked to the back of her sedan, popped the trunk, and lifted out the familiar tan leather duffel bag. She slung it over her shoulder with an easy, practiced familiarity. She had done this 100 times before. This house wasn't a new discovery. It was a regular destination. She walked up the stone pathway leading to the front porch. Every step she took felt like a physical blow to my chest. I slipped behind a large, decorative brick pillar at the edge of the neighbor's property, completely hidden from view but with a direct, unobstructed line of sight to the front door. Sarah reached the porch. She didn't knock. She didn't look for a hidden key. She reached out her hand and pressed the doorbell. Inside my chest, everything shattered. The world slowed down to an agonizing, microscopic crawl. My vision tunneled, focusing entirely on that heavy wooden front door. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a chime echoing from inside the house. I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching from the other side. Asterisk, who is it? Asterisk, the question screamed in my head, a repeating, agonizing loop. Asterisk, is it a colleague? An old flame? A wealthy, secret lover who gives her the life I couldn't provide? Asterisk, I prepared myself to see a man. A man younger than me, or wealthier than me, or more handsome than me. I prepared myself for the blinding, murderous rage that would surely follow. I clenched my fists, bracing my entire body for the impact of the ultimate betrayal. The heavy brass doorknob turned. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. The door slowly swung inward. The space inside the entryway was dimly lit, a sharp contrast to the bright, blinding summer sun outside. A figure stepped forward out of the shadows, moving into the warm sunlight filtering through the screen door. My breath caught entirely in my throat. The anger, the jealousy, the violent adrenaline that had been fueling my 3-hour drive instantly vanished, replaced by a profound, paralyzing shock that left me completely numb. My jaw slackened. My hands slowly opened, my fingers trembling. The person who stood at the door, looking out at my wife with a brilliant, tearful smile, was not a secret lover. It wasn't a man at all. It was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He had a mop of unruly curly brown hair, and he was wearing a bright red t-shirt. But it wasn't his age or his clothes that made my heart stop. It was his face. Even from 50 yards away, the resemblance was so striking, so undeniable, that it felt like looking into a distorted mirror. He had Sarah's distinct, piercing green eyes. He had the exact same shape of her nose, the same slight dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. But the rest of him, the structure of his jaw, the shape of his brow, the way he held his shoulders, was a flawless, terrifying carbon copy of me. "Mummy!" the little boy squealed, his high-pitched voice cutting through the quiet suburban air. He threw himself forward, wrapping his small arms around Sarah's waist. Sarah dropped the tan leather duffel bag to the floor of the porch, sinking to her knees instantly. She pulled the boy into her arms, burying her face in his neck. her shoulders shaking as she began to cry tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Hi, my sweet angel," Sarah sobbed. Holding him so tightly, it looked as if she were trying to pull him inside her own skin. "I missed you so much. I missed you every single day." I leaned heavily against the brick pillar, my knees buckling. The concrete beneath my feet felt like it was shifting, liquefying, sliding away. A little boy who called my wife Mummy, a little boy who looked exactly like me. Before my brain could even begin to process the mathematical impossibility, the biological absurdity of what I was seeing, a second figure emerged from the shadows of the house. A tall, elegant woman with graying hair stepped onto the porch. It was Sarah's mother, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, the very woman who had called our house 3 weeks ago to tell us Aunt Martha was failing. She looked down at Sarah and the boy, a soft maternal smile on her face, before reaching out to pat Sarah's shoulder. "He's been waiting by the window all morning, Sarah," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet lawn. "He wouldn't even eat his breakfast until he saw your car turn the corner." Sarah looked up at her mother, her face wet with tears, a look of profound gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for taking such good care of him, Mum. I hate that I can only be here for a few days. It's getting harder and harder to leave him." "I know, sweetheart," Evelyn replied gently, "but you're doing what you have to do. Come inside. Both of you." They turned and walked into the house, the little boy holding Sarah's hand, hopping up and down with excitement. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind them, clicking firmly into place. I was left standing alone in the shadow of the weeping willow, the bright summer sun burning my skin, utterly destroyed by a truth I couldn't comprehend. I didn't have a son. Sarah and I had never had a child. We had tried years ago, but after a devastating miscarriage in our 3rd year of marriage, Sarah had told me that emotional pain was too great, that she couldn't bear to try again. We had agreed to close that chapter of our lives. So who was this boy? Why did he call her mother? And why, dear God, did he have my face? I don't know how long I stood paralyzed behind that brick pillar. Time lost all meaning. The sun slowly shifted across the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the pristine lawn of the blue house. My mind was trapped in a horrific, dizzying loop. I was a man who built his life on equations, on structural integrity, on facts. But nothing about this equation made sense. The math was impossible. If that boy was 6 years old, he would have been born 6 years ago. 6 years ago, Sarah was living with me. She hadn't disappeared for 9 months. She hadn't been pregnant. I would have known. I slept next to her every single night. Unless a cold, sickening realization began to take root. A memory exploded in my mind with the force of a detonated bomb. 7 years ago. Our 3rd year of marriage. The miscarriage. Sarah had been 5 months pregnant. We were ecstatic. We had already picked out colors for the nursery. Then one terrible night she woke up in excruciating pain, bleeding heavily. I rushed her to the hospital. The doctors took her away into the emergency room. Hours later, a doctor came out, his face solemn, and told me there had been severe complications. The pregnancy was lost. He told me Sarah was heavily sedated, devastated, and needed absolute rest. The next day, Sarah's mother, Evelyn, arrived at the hospital. She had taken charge with a cold, fierce efficiency. She told me I looked exhausted, that I was a mess, and that I needed to go home, shower, and rest for a few hours while she watched over her daughter. I had been so emotionally broken, so drained by grief, that I didn't argue. I went home and slept for 12 hours. When I returned to the hospital, Sarah was awake, her face pale and hollow, her eyes completely dead. She wouldn't look at me. She just held my hand and cried, whispering over and over, "I'm so sorry. David, I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. She stayed in the hospital for another 3 days under her mother's strict care. When she came home, she was different. A part of her had gone completely dark. A year later, she told me she could never attempt to have a child again. The trauma was too deep. And a few months after that, the annual trips to visit Great Aunt Martha began. My chest heaved as the pieces of the horrific puzzle violently slammed together. The miscarriage hadn't been a miscarriage. I didn't think. I didn't plan. The logical engineer was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, bleeding father who demanded to know the truth. I walked out from behind the pillar. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel driveway as I marched toward the front porch. Every step felt like walking through deep, heavy mud. My heart was a frantic wild animal slamming against my ribs. I reached the porch. I didn't ring the bell. I raised my fist and slammed it against the heavy wooden door, over and over, a loud, violent thundering that shattered the peaceful silence of the neighborhood. Sarah. I roared, my voice breaking, thick with raw emotion. Sarah. Open the door. Inside, the muffled sounds of laughter and chatter instantly ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the house. I heard hurried footsteps approaching. The lock turned. The doorknob twisted. The door swung open and Evelyn stood there, her face set in a stern expression that instantly turned to absolute, bloodless horror when her eyes met mine. David. She whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh my God. Where is she, Evelyn? I demanded, my voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of rage and agony. I pushed past her, stepping into the warm, bright entryway of the house. David, wait! You can't be here. Please, leave. Evelyn cried, grabbing my arm, but I threw her grip off effortlessly. I walked into the living room. There, standing by a large window overlooking the garden, was Sarah. She was holding the little boy close to her side, her face completely white, her eyes wide with a paralyzing primal terror. The boy looked up at me, his large green eyes filled with confusion and fear. Sensing the intense vibration of anger in the room, he shrank back against Sarah's leg. Seeing him up close, seeing my own eyes staring back at me from that innocent little face, completely broke something inside me. The anger evaporated, replaced by a crushing, agonizing grief. David! Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. How? What are you doing here? Who is he, Sarah? I asked. My voice wasn't loud anymore. It was hollow, cracked, bleeding. I pointed a trembling finger at the boy. Who is this child? Sarah didn't answer. She just looked at me, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking violently. David, please. Evelyn stepped between us, her voice sharp, defensive. You need to calm down. You're frightening the child. Go outside. We can talk about this outside. No! I shouted, the rage rushing back, hot and volatile. We are not talking outside. I have spent 12 years being the perfect husband. I worked myself to the bone for you. I trusted you with my life, with my soul. And for 7 years, you have been coming here, lying to my face, pretending to visit a dying old woman, while my son was alive. The little boy, terrified by my shouting, burst into tears, burying his face in Sarah's skirt. Mummy, who is that man? Why is he angry? Sarah immediately dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him, rocking him back and forth. Leo, it's okay, baby. It's okay. Mummy's here. Go to Grandma's room, okay? Go with Grandma Evelyn. Everything is going to be fine, I promise. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She quickly scooped the sobbing boy into her arms and hurried down the hallway, throwing a look of pure, burning resentment at me before slamming the bedroom door shut behind them. The living room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Only the sound of Sarah's quiet, ragged sobbing filled the space. She slowly stood up, wiping her face with the back of her hand, looking at me with a profound, crushing sorrow. He has my face, Sarah, I whispered, the tears finally spilling over my own eyes, hot and stinging. He has my eyes. He's mine, isn't he? He didn't die 7 years ago. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders sagging as if a massive, invisible weight she had been carrying for a decade had finally crushed her into the earth. She nodded slowly. Yes, David, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's your son. His name is Leo, and he was never supposed to exist. The words hung in the warm air of the living room like a physical, suffocating fog. Asterisk, he's your son. Asterisk, I sank into a nearby armchair, my strength completely deserting me. My head dropped into my hands, and for the first time since I was a child, I wept. I cried for the 7 years of milestones I had missed. I cried for the first steps I never saw, the first words I never heard, the birthdays I was never invited to. I cried for the beautiful, twisted lie my life had become. Sarah walked over slowly, kneeling on the floor in front of me. She didn't try to touch me. She knew she had lost that right. David, listen to me, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. You need to know the truth. All of it. 7 years ago when I was in that hospital, the doctor didn't tell you the whole story. I didn't have a normal miscarriage. I had a severe psychological break. During the pregnancy, I was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of postpartum psychosis that triggered early. I was having severe, terrifying hallucinations. I was a danger to myself, and the doctors feared I would be a danger to the baby if he survived. I looked up through my tears, frowning, trying to process the medical terms. What? What are you talking about? The night I went into labor early, Sarah continued, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her cheeks. The doctors had to perform an emergency delivery. Leo was born healthy, but I completely lost my mind, David. I didn't recognize him. I tried to hurt him. The hospital psychiatrists told my mother that my condition was so severe, so deeply rooted in the trauma of the pregnancy, that if I kept the baby, I would either end up destroying him or myself. They wanted to commit me to a long-term state asylum. She took a shaky breath, looking down at her hands. My mother couldn't let that happen. She made a desperate, horrific choice to protect us all. She told the hospital staff she would take full legal custody of the baby and raise him secretly far away, under a different name. She made a deal with the head chief of medicine to alter the records. Then she came to you and told you the baby had died. She told me the baby had died too. David, for the first 2 years of Leo's life, I believed my son was dead. I lived in that dark, hollow grief right alongside you. I stared at her, my heart freezing in my chest. You thought he was dead? Yes, she cried, her voice cracking with raw emotion. I was on heavy antipsychotic medication for 2 years. But on the 3rd year, my mother couldn't keep the secret anymore. She saw how the grief was eating me alive. She brought me here to this house she bought using my father's inheritance. She opened the door and she showed me Leo. He was 2 years old. He looked exactly like you. Why didn't you tell me then? I screamed, standing up, the agony turning back into a furious fire. When you found out he was alive, why didn't you come home and tell your husband? We could have raised him together. We could have been a family. Because I couldn't, David. Sarah yelled back, her face contorted in pain. The doctors told my mother that my stability was entirely dependent on my routine. More importantly, the legal records were falsified. If we brought him back into our life, if we tried to claim him, my mother would have gone to prison for fraud and kidnapping. I would have been investigated by Child Protective Services. They would have looked at my medical history, my psychotic episode, and they would have taken Leo away from both of us forever. He would have ended up in the foster system. She stepped closer, her eyes begging for understanding. I chose the only path that kept him safe and kept me sane. My mother raised him here in this beautiful, peaceful town, and every summer, when my corporate job gave me a break, I came here to be his mother. I invented Aunt Martha so you wouldn't ask questions. I sacrificed my own happiness, my own marriage, to ensure my son had a stable life with his grandmother, rather than a broken life with a mentally unstable mother in a courtroom. I stood there, the silence crashing down on me once again. The logic, the terrifying, beautiful, tragic logic of her actions began to settle into my mind. She hadn't left me for another man. She hadn't betrayed our love out of malice or selfishness. She had broken her own heart, and mine, to protect our child from a system that would have torn him apart. She had carried the crushing weight of this secret alone for 7 years, enduring my sympathy, enduring the guilt, just to hold her son for 4 days a year. I looked toward the hallway. The door to the bedroom slowly opened, and Evelyn stepped out. Behind her, clinging to her hand, was Leo. He had stopped crying. He looked at me with an intense, quiet curiosity. He looked at my face, then at the framed photos of Sarah on the mantelpiece, then back at me. Are you my daddy?" Leo asked softly, his small voice echoing through the quiet room. The final wall around my heart completely collapsed. The anger, the betrayal, the years of confusion and pain melted away into nothingness. I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor, stretching my arms out toward him. "Yes, buddy," I choked out, the tears blinding me. "I'm your daddy. I'm so sorry it took me so long to find you." Leo didn't hesitate. He broke away from Evelyn and ran across the room, throwing his small, warm body into my arms. I held him so tightly, burying my face in his curly brown hair, smelling the scent of the summer air and the clean, innocent fragrance of my own bloodline. Sarah sank to the floor next to us, wrapping her arms around both of us, her sobbing turning into a sound of pure, overwhelming relief. We didn't go back to Chicago that weekend. We stayed in the Blue House. We didn't call the police and we didn't call lawyers. The structure of our life had been permanently altered. But for the first time in 7 years, the foundation was real. It was built on the truth. We began the long, slow process of legally adopting Leo, navigating the complex legal loopholes with the help of a discreet attorney, ensuring Evelyn was protected while bringing our son home for good. I learned a profound, painful lesson that summer. Sometimes, love